Welcome to Pages to Dialogues, your premier destination for insightful discussions on Christian books. Join me as we delve into the pages of thought-provoking Christian literature and explore the timeless truths and principles that can transform our lives. From classic devotionals to contemporary bestsellers, we'll engage in meaningful dialogues that will inspire, encourage, and challenge you to grow deeper in your faith. So, subscribe to Pages to Dialogues now and join the conversation. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you can stay updated on new episodes and exclusive content. Let's turn pages into conversations that matter.
All right, so today we're taking a deep dive into You and Me Forever by Francis and Lisa Chan.
Ooh, that's a good one.
It is, right. And it's interesting because, there are tons of books out there on marriage.
So many books.
But this one, I think, takes a pretty unique approach.
I think so too.
So it's written from a Christian perspective.
Yeah.
But the Chans, they don't just focus on, building a happy marriage here on earth.
Right.
They really push readers to look at marriage through what they call an eternity lens.
I love that. I love it.
That's kind of a cool concept,
right?
Yeah. So it's almost like, every fight, every decision,
every joy,
every moment of joy, all of it is
every cup of coffee. Shit.
Yeah, is preparation for this eternal relationship ultimately with God.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's a pretty radical concept.
It is. And it makes you think about, what does a successful marriage actually look like,
Absolutely.
So let's unpack this eternity lens a little bit, Yeah.
What does it actually mean, on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah.
How do we actually live that out?
Yeah. Well, in the very first chapter, which is titled, and I love this title, Marriage Isn't That Great, But God Is.
I know. Such a good title.
They come out swinging.
Yeah, they really do.
Because they argue that if you're just aiming for a happy marriage, that's too small.
It's not.
You're setting the bar too low.
It's almost like you're missing the bigger picture.
Right. Their point is God. God should be the focus. God should be the ultimate focus.
Yeah. Not just our own, satisfaction.
Not just our own.
Or happiness. Yeah.
Yeah. They tell a really powerful anecdote to illustrate this. It's an elderly couple. They've been married for 75 years.
Wow.
And he's faithfully by her bedside, holding her hand. She has dementia and doesn't even recognize him, but his love is unwavering. 83 years. 83 years they have shared life.
It's beautiful, but I'm kind of curious. How does that story
connect to this idea of an eternity lens?
Well, it shows how they're defining success. Yeah. It's not about fleeting emotions,
right,
or perfect bliss. It's about a commitment.
A commitment that goes beyond the circumstances.
That transcends circumstances.
Yeah.
Yeah. And mirrors, in a way, God's unwavering love for us, a love that stretches into eternity.
So it's almost like marriage becomes less about what we get out of it and more about reflecting.
That's right.
Like a much bigger, eternal story.
Exactly. And this leads right into chapter 2. And it's called Pursue the Perfect Marriage.
Okay, so perfect marriage. I mean, isn't that setting people up for failure? Doesn't that sound kind of impossible?
Right. That's exactly what they address the problem. They argue that, as a culture, we've really distorted what we mean by perfect marriage.
Yeah, what comes to mind? I mean, when you hear perfect marriage, what do you think of?
I think of the romantic gestures and, maybe financial stability, the perfect house, that kind of almost, I guess, an idealized version of family life.
Yeah. And the Chans would say that's not it at all.
They would say that's not it at all.
So what is it? I mean, what's the alternative? What does a perfect marriage look like?
They believe that a truly perfect marriage, it's not just about the couple's happiness.
Okay.
It's about displaying the gospel to the world.
Okay. So the gospel being,
was good news.
The good news of...
Yeah, of God's love and salvation.
Okay.
It's about living in a way that points people towards something bigger than themselves.
I like that. It's almost like your marriage becomes, not about achieving some ideal, but about reflecting God's love.
Yeah.
And outwardly.
It's very countercultural.
It is.
Especially today.
When
it's all about me first, they argue that Christian marriage flips the script.
It's about putting
on self-centeredness.
God first and then your spouse.
God and spouse before self.
Yeah. That's really interesting because I think so many people approach marriage with that question of what am I getting out of this?
Yeah.
How is this benefiting me.
How is this fulfilling me?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And that's not what they're saying at all.
Not at all. And they use the example of, the Apostle Paul and his willingness to suffer
Okay.
for the gospel, contrasting it with those who claim to be apostles.
Right.
But we're really just in it for power and wealth.
So it's like there's true Christianity,
Yeah, true Christianity.
and then there's kind of this
there's this
distorted version.
distorted version.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's, I mean, a lot to unpack already, but I want to jump into chapter 3 because it deals with conflict.
Oh, yes.
And the title is just so intriguing. Learn to fight well because the wrong enemy is scary.
It's good, isn't it?
It's such a good title. I love it. But what is that wrong enemy? What are they talking about?
Well, they believe that most marital fights are not truly about the surface issue,
Right.
whether it's dirty dishes or
Yeah.
money or parenting.
Those little things.
Yeah. Those things that we kind of grab onto. They say pride and selfishness are the real culprits.
So it's like the thing you're arguing about is not actually the thing.
The wrong enemies lurking beneath. Yeah.
It's almost like a symptom of something deeper.
Yeah. And they bring in that great verse from James 4:6. God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble.
Oh, that's good.
Isn't that powerful?
Yeah, because it makes you think about, it's not about winning,
Right.
against your spouse. It's about like aligning yourself with God. That's about humbling yourself.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. And so, so then they illustrate this with a woman. Her name was Raisha.
Okay.
And she confessed that she did not feel love for her husband
Wow, that's honest.
at that moment. She chose to act in obedience to God anyway.
So it's about like making the right choice.
Yeah.
Even when your emotions are telling you to do something else.
Exactly. So
Sweet.
sometimes love is a choice,
Not just a feeling.
not just a feeling.
Yeah,
And that's challenging for many of us.
it is. It is. And I think, tying this back to the eternity lens,
Yes.
it's like
Huh?
even when it's hard
Yeah.
to make the right choices,
Right.
that's where the eternity lens comes in because it's like,
Right. Because,
it's not just about what's happening right now. It's about,
well, that's where their call to action comes in chapter 4. Don't waste your marriage. There's a bigger mission.
oh, I like that. So what's that bigger mission? Like what are we talking about here?
So, they use this analogy of a 5-year-old playing soccer.
Yeah.
And this 5-year-old is more interested in the dandelions
Then the actual game.
than the soccer game.
Mm-hmm.
They're like, are we missing the point of the game?
That's a good question. I mean, what is the game?
So they believe that God's mission for us is to make disciples,
Okay, so to go out and
to share the gospel with others and help them grow in their faith.
okay, gotcha.
And marriage, they argue, is part of that mission,
Not the whole thing.
not the whole thing.
It's part of it. So it's almost like our marriages should be like pointing people outward
Yes.
towards God, not just like inward towards each other.
Yes.
And our own needs.
And our own needs and desires. And they give some compelling reasons why this mission should be a priority.
Like what?
Well, first of all, Jesus commanded it.
Okay, so that's pretty straightforward.
Pretty straightforward. God's presence
Yeah.
and power are available to us.
Mm-hmm.
As we carry out this mission, there's an urgency
There's a sense of urgency, yeah.
to reaching people before it's too late.
Mm-hmm.
And they even mentioned that God will provide.
So it's not like we have to do this on our own.
No.
We've got help.
We have his help.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they're laying out a really strong case.
For why this bigger mission should be
central.
like at the forefront of how we live our lives, including our marriage.
Yeah.
Wow.
Okay, so
It's a lot.
it's a lot. And I have to say, listening to all of this, it can feel,
It can feel daunting.
kind of overwhelming
Yeah,
a little bit, like,
a little bit.
is there hope?
Yeah.
Like, is there actually hope for those of us who,
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and that's exactly what chapter 5 is. Is there hope for us? Hint, it's not found in self-help.
oh, good. Because,
Yeah,
self-help books only go so far, right?
right.
So what's their answer?
They point to the hope found in the Holy Spirit as
Okay.
the source of true change.
So it's not about, like, mustering up
Willpower.
our own willpower
Also technique.
or reading enough books or, going to enough therapy or
Right.
whatever.
It's about the Holy Spirit working within us.
Yeah. And that's interesting because they even share an example from their own lives. They do. Their daughter who was transformed not through stricter rules, but through prayer.
Wow. So it's about seeking God's work in our lives, not just our outward behavior.
Exactly.
Not just like, checking off all the boxes and making it look good on the outside.
That's right. And this brings us to chapter 6, which tackles parenting.
Chapter 6. What's really best for the kids? It's not always easy.
I love it.
Yeah, I have a feeling this is going to resonate with a lot of our listeners.
It's going to hit home for a lot of people.
It is. But how do they approach parenting? Because
Through the eternity lens, of course.
Of course. But what does that actually look like?
Right. Well, they asked this question. What would break your heart more, your kids not loving you or not loving Jesus?
Oof.
That's tough.
As a parent, you want to say, well, I want both.
Right.
But the way they phrase it, it really makes you stop and think,
And it gets to the heart of their parenting philosophy.
Which is?
The goal is not to create a Christian bubble for your kids.
Right. Or to just raise good kids.
Or to simply raise well-behaved children. It's about raising children who genuinely love God.
And choose to follow him freely.
Yes.
Yeah. It's not about forcing them into something.
No.
Or making them, follow all the rules just because we say so.
Right. It's about nurturing their own faith.
Yeah.
And it starts with modeling authentic faith.
Oh, that's good. So it's about us as parents, walking the walk.
And they share their own parenting struggles.
They're real about it.
They are.
That's cool.
They're not claiming to be perfect parents.
No, none of us are.
But they serve a perfect God.
Right. And I think that's so encouraging because so many parents feel like, they're failing or they're messing it up.
Right. And they're like, look, it's not about being the perfect example.
Right.
But it's about pointing your kids to the one who is perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. Okay, so, I think a big fear for a lot of parents is like, what if my kids
reject the faith?
Reject the faith. Right. What if they grow up and they're like, you know what? I don't believe this anymore.
Yeah.
What do we do?
Well, and they acknowledge that there's no guarantee that our kids will follow God.
They can do all the right things.
You can do all the things.
All of the right things.
And they still might.
And they might reject it.
Choose a different path. Yeah.
Right. But they encourage us to trust God.
Trust God. Yeah.
With the outcome.
So plant the seeds.
Plant the seeds, water them with prayer.
Yeah.
And know that he ultimately brings the growth.
Yeah, I love that. It's like, we can't control our kids.
You can't. And that's so hard.
It's so hard. But we can surrender them to God.
Yes.
Okay. And then kind of shifting gears a little bit.
Yeah.
Chapter 11, The Amazing Race.
Oh, I love this chapter.
It's a good one, right?
Yeah.
But what are they talking about when they say finishing the race well?
Well, they use the image of a race to illustrate the Christian life.
And it's not about sprinting at the start and burning out quickly. It's about endurance, faithfulness,
perseverance,
keeping your eyes on the finish line.
And what is that finish line ultimately?
Heaven, spending eternity with God.
Right. But it's interesting because they talk about heaven in a kind of different way.
It's not this far off reward.
Right.
It's a reality that shapes our lives now.
So how do we actually live with that in mind?
Well, they encourage us to have a sense of anticipation for heaven.
Okay.
To think about what it will be like to be in God's presence, free from pain and suffering. They even suggest studying the topic of rewards in the New Testament.
Interesting.
Not in a way that earns our salvation, but in a way that fuels excitement.
For what's to come.
To come. Yeah, and they remind us that finishing the race well isn't just about avoiding sin.
Yeah.
It's about actively pursuing God's mission, using our gifts to serve others.
So living a life that counts.
A life that counts. Yeah, a life that echoes into the next chapter.
I like that. It's like it's not over when it's over.
It's not over when it's over.
It's not. Right. There's more.
Yeah. And they leave us with this challenge. They ask, if you were given the choice to be with Jesus today, would you choose to leave your family?
Oh, wow. That's a hard one.
It's a hypothetical question.
Yeah, it makes you think, though.
It makes you examine.
Like, what are my priorities?
The depth of your love for God.
Yeah. Are we so focused on, our earthly family and our earthly, life that we're forgetting about the eternal one?
Our ultimate allegiance to Christ, yeah.
Yeah.
And they encourage us to fight doubt, to fan the flames of our faith and cultivate a longing for heaven.
So it's not just about enduring this life. It's about actively looking forward to the next one.
Yes.
Yes.
Wow. Okay. So as we kind of come to the end of part 1 here.
What's the biggest takeaway for you from these first few chapters?
It's the transformative power of this eternity lens.
Yeah.
Shifting our perspective.
Yeah.
So that we're viewing everything from our marriages to our parenting to our everyday choices.
For the lens
eternity.
Eternity.
It's a challenge to live with purpose.
Yeah.
To love intentionally.
Yeah. And I think that's so key because it's not about being perfect.
It's not about achieving perfection.
Right. It's about the bigger picture.
It's about the bigger picture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, what they're getting at with this whole idea of the eternity lens.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, we're going to take a quick break, but we'll be right back with part 2.
More to come.
Where we're going to dive even deeper into you and me forever.
Can't wait.
All right. We'll be right back. Okay, so we're back, and I'm still thinking about this whole eternity lens idea.
It's pretty powerful, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like, it really makes you reevaluate everything.
It does. But, I think sometimes it's easy to get caught up in the, the big ideas and the concepts, but how do we actually put this into practice?
Yeah, that's a great question. And thankfully, the Chans don't just leave us hanging with these big, lofty ideas.
Okay, good.
They get really practical.
Okay.
So chapter 8 is called Do Something, which...
I like it. Straight to the point.
Yeah, there's no fluff here. It's like, okay, you've read this far. Now what are you going to do about it?
So what are they suggesting we do? Like, what action steps are they recommending?
Well, they first acknowledge that, it's easy to read a book like this.
Nod your head. Yeah. That's great.
Right, like good stuff.
And then go back to life as usual.
Right, and nothing changes.
Right.
So they challenge us to actually implement these ideas.
Okay.
Even if it feels messy or uncomfortable at first.
To get out of your comfort zone.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And they're not claiming to have all the answers.
Okay.
But they really stress the importance of action.
Yeah. Action. I like that. So it's not about just knowing the right things. It's about actually doing them.
Doing them. It's about moving beyond the head knowledge to heart transformation.
Yeah, that makes sense. And they connect this to the idea of fearing God.
Yes, they do.
Okay, hold on. Fearing God. I mean, that sounds a little...
I know it sounds a little scary.
Yeah, a little intense, maybe?
Yeah.
Like, what are they talking about?
It's not about being terrified of punishment, because some people might think. It's about having this deep respect and awe for God.
Okay.
This profound understanding of his holiness and power that it motivates us to live differently.
So it's not like, oh, I better do this or else God's going to get mad.
Right. It's not about a fear of punishment.
Right. Okay. So how does that play out in marriage? Like, how does this fear of God actually impact our relationships with our spouses?
Well, they use this great analogy of staring at the sun.
Okay.
Like, imagine looking directly at the sun. It's so bright and overwhelming that you can't help but shield your eyes.
Right. You would never do that.
You wouldn't.
You'd go blind.
Exactly.
Okay. I get it. But how does that translate to our marriages?
Well, they suggest that when we truly grasp the magnitude of God's glory, it changes everything.
Okay.
Suddenly, those petty arguments.
The things that we tend to blow up.
Yes, those little things.
Yeah.
Those selfish desires, those temptations that try to pull us away from God and our spouses.
Right.
They lose their appeal.
It's like, how can you stay mad at your spouse when you're in awe of God's power and God's love?
That's exactly right.
Yeah. That makes sense. So, practically speaking,
Yeah.
what are some things we can do to cultivate this healthy fear of God?
Well, they talk about spending time in prayer.
Okay, so not just rattling off a list.
Not just asking for things.
Yeah.
But really meditating on God's character.
Okay, getting to know him better.
Really getting to know him on a deeper level.
Yeah. And also, reading the Bible, right?
It's absolutely.
Not just as a storybook.
Not just as a history book.
Yeah.
But
as
the living word of God.
Right. The living, breathing word of God.
Yeah.
Okay. So, I think for a lot of us, there are certain temptations that are really hard to resist, even when we want to follow God.
Yes, that's true. And the Chans, they don't shy away from those difficult topics.
Good.
They talk about pornography, flirting, emotional infidelity.
Okay.
Even in today's culture, where those things are so normalized.
Yeah. It's almost like people are like, oh, is that really still wrong?
Right, like times have changed.
Right. But the Chans would say...
They would say that God's standards haven't changed.
Okay. So it's not about what's popular or what everyone else is doing.
It's about what God says.
Yeah.
And they believe that, this healthy fear of God serves as a deterrent
Against those temptations.
against those temptations.
Yeah. It's like if you really grasp how holy God is, it's harder to justify doing those things.
Right.
That go against his plan for marriage.
It's not just about following rules.
Right.
It's about wanting to honor God and protect the sanctity of your marriage.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, so we've talked about fearing God, resisting temptation. What else?
Well, they also talk about worshiping God, not marriage.
Okay, wait, hold on. So they're saying we shouldn't prioritize our marriage.
Not exactly. It's more about keeping things in perspective.
Okay.
So it's easy to get so caught up in marriage, the routines,
The day-to-day.
the challenges, the joys,
Right.
that we can accidentally place it on a pedestal.
And forget about God.
Yeah. That's like, marriage is a good gift, but it shouldn't become an idol.
I like that. It's about like keeping our priorities straight.
Yeah, and they use this great analogy of a computer screensaver.
Oh, okay.
So when your computer sits idle, the screensaver pops up, reminding you of its true purpose.
Okay.
They're saying marriage should function in a similar way, continually pointing us back to God.
Like God is the real screensaver of our hearts.
Yes.
I love that analogy.
Me too. It's so visual,
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about, fearing God, resisting temptation.
Keeping our priorities straight.
Keeping our priorities straight.
Yeah.
What else?
Well, in Chapter 9, they tackle a topic that often sparks a lot of debate. Submission in marriage.
Ooh, yeah. That's a tough one.
It's a bit of a minefield.
It is. So how do they even approach that?
Carefully. And they don't shy away from the biblical text that addresses this.
Good.
But they provide a lot of context.
Okay.
They emphasize that submission, as described in the Bible, is not about blind obedience.
Okay, so it's not about like being a doormat.
We're becoming a doormat.
Okay.
Yeah. It's about respecting the God-given roles within marriage and putting your spouse's needs before your own. Okay, but submission still feels like such a loaded word.
I know.
Especially in today's culture,
It is.
So how do the Chans reconcile that with, their emphasis on equality and mutual respect?
Well, they make a really interesting comparison to the Trinity.
Oh, okay.
They explain that God the Son submitted to God the Father.
Okay.
Not out of weakness, but out of love.
Oh, that's interesting.
And a desire to fulfill the Father's will.
So it's like it flips the script on what we typically think of when we hear the word submission.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's good. So it's not about one spouse
having more power
or authority.
Right.
It's about recognizing the unique strengths and roles that each person brings.
Yeah, and choosing to serve each other out of love.
Yeah, I like that.
And they're very careful to say that submission to God always comes first.
Okay, that's important.
If your spouse asks you to do something that goes against God,
right,
you're not obligated to obey.
That's a good boundary.
It is, and it's important.
Yeah.
Yeah. So practically speaking.
Yes. Practically speaking, what does this look like?
Well, for wives, they offer some specific advice. They remind us that we're submitting to a God-given position.
Okay.
Not to our husband's perfection.
So it's not about our husbands being perfect.
That's the position.
Right. And they also emphasize that our husbands are meant to be partners.
Not dictators.
Not dictators, yes, exactly.
Okay, that's good. So it's like a respectful collaboration.
Yes, very much so.
And it's interesting because, they encourage wives to use their voices.
Yeah, they do.
To share their opinions and concerns.
Right.
Even while ultimately
trusting their husband's leadership.
Okay, so there's that balance of
Yeah, respecting and trusting.
Respect and honesty, yeah. But what about husbands?
Yeah, well, they remind husbands that their leadership should be modeled after Christ.
Okay.
Not about lording it over their wives, but serving sacrificially. So again, it's like a different way of looking at leadership.
It is.
Than what we typically see in the world.
Right. Yeah.
And they really emphasize that husbands need to seek their wives' input.
Oh, this is a partnership.
It is a partnership and making decisions together.
Okay, so it sounds like both spouses are called to submit to God and to serve each other.
It's beautifully said.
Yeah.
And it's important to remember that this is an ongoing process.
Oh,
it's not about achieving perfect harmony.
It's about continually choosing
to die to ourselves and put the other person first.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here in this second part.
A lot.
I mean, we've talked about taking action, fearing God, resisting temptation.
Worshiping God, not marriage.
submission in marriage.
Yeah.
It's a lot.
It's a lot to process. But, I think it's good to pause and let this stuff really sink in.
Yes. Let's do that. We're going to take a quick break, but we'll be right back with part 3.
Where we're going to wrap up our deep dive into You and Me Forever. So stay tuned. Mm-hmm. All right, so we are back. Back for the final part of our deep dive into You and Me Forever by Francis and Lisa Chan.
I feel like my brain is full.
Yeah, we've covered so much ground already.
So much. It's a lot.
But good stuff, though, right?
Really good stuff, yeah.
I feel like this book is really making me think about things in a new way,
Yeah, and in the last section when we were talking about prioritizing God over marriage,
Uh-huh.
I mean, that really resonated with me. Like, it's so easy to slip into making your marriage an idol, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's like we can get so caught up in building our own little kingdoms here, and we forget about the eternal one.
Yeah.
But thankfully, the Chants don't stop there. They also talk about applying this eternity lens to parenting.
Yes, they do.
Which is, that's another huge area of life.
Oh, huge.
And they do this in chapter 10, The Goal of Parenting. And I just love how they start this chapter. They ask this question: what would break your heart more, your kids not loving you or your kids not loving Jesus?
Oof. That's a good one.
It is, right? As a parent, you want to say, well, I want both.
Right.
But the way they phrase it,
Yeah.
it just really makes you stop and think.
It does.
Yeah.
It really gets to the heart of, I think, what it means to parent with a bigger picture in mind.
Yeah.
Like they argue that the ultimate goal isn't to raise well-behaved kids.
Right. Or even to create a Christian bubble for them to live in.
No. They're like, no, it's about pointing them toward a relationship with God.
That will last forever.
Yes. And that begins with us modeling.
Right. We have to walk the walk.
Authentic faith.
Yeah.
They share their own stories, too, of their own parenting struggles.
They're honest about it.
They are.
I like that.
It's refreshing.
Yeah, it is. It's they're not claiming to have it all figured out.
No one does.
But they're showing that they're relying on God.
Yeah, and it's so encouraging for those parents who, feel like they're failing or messing up all the time.
Right, because we all do.
We all do.
It's not about being perfect.
It's about pointing your kids to the one who is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. And, they offer some practical tips for how to do that.
They do.
Making prayer a regular part of family life.
Yeah.
Teaching your kids about God's character through, Bible stories.
Even through discipline.
Discipline.
Yeah.
Yeah. Using that as a teaching moment.
Exactly. An opportunity to show grace and forgiveness.
Okay, so we're not just raising kids, we're shaping disciples.
That's good.
Yeah. But I think for a lot of parents, there's this fear.
Yeah.
What if my kid rejects the faith?
Right.
What if they grow up and they're like, nah, not for me?
Yeah. That's a scary thought.
It is. And the Chans acknowledge that.
They do.
There's no guarantee
That our kids will follow God.
You can do all the things right, and they might still walk away.
Yeah, it's almost like we have to let go of that control.
It's about releasing them and trusting God.
Trusting God, yeah.
That He is working in their lives, even when we can't see it.
Even when it doesn't look like it.
Yeah.
Okay, I like that. That's really encouraging. Okay, so now shifting gears a little bit.
Okay.
In chapter 11, they talk about the amazing race.
Yes. I love that image of a race.
Me too. But what do they mean when they talk about finishing the race well?
Well, it's not about sprinting at the start and then burning out.
Right. It's about endurance.
It's about perseverance, faithfulness, keeping your eyes fixed on the finish line.
And that finish line is ultimately
heaven.
Spending eternity with God.
Right. But they challenge us to think about heaven in a different way.
Yes. Not just as this distant reward.
Right. It's not just when I die, I go to heaven.
Right. It's a reality that shapes our lives now.
Okay, so how do we actually live with heaven in mind?
Well, they encourage us to cultivate a sense of anticipation.
Okay.
Think about what it will be like to be in God's presence, free from pain and suffering.
It's almost like we should be excited about it.
Yes, excited.
Yeah.
Yeah. They even suggest doing a study on the topic of rewards in the New Testament.
Interesting.
Yeah. And again, not in a way that earns our salvation,
Right.
but in a way that fuels our excitement.
Yeah, it should be motivating.
Yeah, motivating.
I think if we truly believe this,
Uh-huh.
shouldn't it impact how we live our lives now?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And they remind us that finishing the race well isn't just about avoiding sin.
Right.
It's about actively pursuing God's mission.
Yes, using your gifts to serve others. Share his love with the world.
So it's about living a life that counts, that matters.
A life that echoes into the next chapter.
Yeah. And they leave us with this really powerful challenge.
Yes, they do.
They ask, if you were given the choice to be with Jesus today, would you choose to leave your family?
It's a tough question.
That's a really tough question.
But it really makes you examine, like, where's your heart?
Yeah. Like, are we holding on so tightly to these earthly things that we're forgetting about the eternal ones?
Yeah. Good question.
And they encourage us to fight doubt, to fan the flames of our faith, and to cultivate a longing for heaven.
Yeah.
So it's not just about like getting through this life. It's about actively looking forward to
what comes next.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, for me, one of the biggest takeaways from this book has been the reminder that our true home is not here.
Right. We're just passing through.
We're just passing through.
Yeah.
We're citizens of heaven.
Yeah.
And that hope should sustain us.
Right. Like that's what gets us through the tough times.
Yes. It should motivate us to live with purpose, to love, to serve.
Yeah. It's not about achieving some perfect state of being here. It's about
running the race well.
Running the race.
Yeah. Keeping our eyes fixed on that prize.
The ultimate prize.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's really what this whole book is about.
It is.
It's about living with eternity in mind.
It's about that eternity lens.
The eternity lens, yeah.
Yeah.
So if you're listening to this and you're like, man, this is really resonating with me,
Yeah.
I highly encourage you to check out You and Me Forever.
Yeah, it's a good one.
It's so good. It's so good.
And remember, this is just our take,
Of course.
our interpretation of their message, and we encourage you to explore for yourself and draw your own conclusions.
Absolutely. Always, always, always. Well, this has been such a great conversation.
It has.
I feel like I've learned so much.
Me too.
I hope our listeners have as well.
I hope so.
And until next time, keep diving.
Yeah, keep diving deep.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Pages to Dialogues. We hope you enjoyed our discussion and found valuable insights to apply to your life. If you did, please consider subscribing to our YouTube channel, Pages to Dialogues, for more thought-provoking dialogues on Christian books.